Welcome to Paranormal Pages. Let's get straight into the true scary stories. Story 1. The Unseen Observer. It started innocuously enough, with my phone's facial recognition failing sporadically. Annoying, sure, but nothing worth losing sleep over. I assumed it was a glitch or a poorly lit room. But then, one evening, as I lounged on my couch, the phone unlocked on its own. A cold shiver ran down my spine. There was no one else in the room. I convinced myself it was just a trick of the light, some quirk in the technology. Little did I know, this was just the beginning. I live alone in a quaint, albeit slightly run-down, Victorian house on the outskirts of town. The house has always had its quirks, creaky floors, drafty windows, but its charm outweighed the inconveniences. That night, after the phone incident, I began noticing other odd occurrences. Shadows moved just out of the corner of my eye, and I heard faint whispers that seemed to come from nowhere. The rational part of my mind attributed it to my overactive imagination. The house, after all, was old and filled with history. One night, I decided to capture the strange occurrences on video. I set up my phone on the kitchen counter, facing the living room where most of the activities seemed to happen. As I sat in the armchair, pretending to read, I felt a prickling sensation on the back of my neck, as if someone were standing right behind me. I turned around quickly. Nothing. My heart pounded in my chest, but I forced myself to stay calm. The phone unlocked again, its screen lighting up the dim room. I picked it up and watched the footage. My blood ran cold. There, behind me, was a faint, ghostly figure. It was just a shadow, a vague outline, but it was unmistakably a person standing over my shoulder. I dropped the phone, my hands trembling. What was happening in my house? Desperate for answers, I started researching the house's history. I discovered that the previous owner, a reclusive artist named Eleanor, had died under mysterious circumstances. Her body was found in the very living room where I had seen the figure. The official cause of death was a heart attack, but there were rumors of something more sinister, a malevolent presence that had driven her to madness. As the days passed, the activity in the house intensified. Objects moved on their own, doors slammed shut, and the whispers grew louder, more insistent. I felt like I was being watched constantly. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had haunted Eleanor was now targeting me. I reached out to a local paranormal investigator, hoping to find some explanation, some way to rid myself of this terror. When the investigator, a grizzled man named Tom, arrived, he immediately sensed the malevolent energy in the house. "There's something here," he said, his voice grave. "Something that feeds on fear." He set up his equipment, cameras, audio recorders, EMF meters, and began his investigation. As we reviewed the footage together, the figure appeared again and again, each time more defined, more menacing. Tom's face paled as he analyzed the data. "This spirit is powerful. It's not just haunting this place, it's attached to you now." My blood turned to ice. The idea of a spirit following me, invading every aspect of my life, was almost too much to bear. I felt trapped, cornered by an invisible predator. Hey! Subscribe for more true scary stories. The weight of Tom's words hung over me like a dark cloud. The idea that the spirit was now attached to me sent my mind spiraling into paranoia. Every creak, every whisper, every flicker of light became an omen. I couldn't escape it, no matter where I went. Tom advised me to stay calm, to avoid showing fear, but that was easier said than done. The oppressive presence was everywhere. One evening, as I sat in my bedroom, trying to focus on anything but the creeping dread, my phone buzzed. A notification from the facial recognition app popped up, "New face detected." My heart leapt into my throat. With trembling hands, I opened the app. There, in the dimly lit bedroom, was the figure again, standing right behind me. Its features were clearer now, a twisted visage with hollow eyes that seemed to bore into my soul. I spun around, but of course, the room was empty. "Get out," I whispered to myself, the words barely audible. But the spirit wouldn't leave. It grew bolder, more aggressive. I started finding scratches on the walls, messages scrawled in a jagged, almost frantic script. "Leave and you are mine" were etched into the paint, deep and menacing. Sleep became impossible. I was trapped in a waking nightmare, my mind fraying at the edges. In my desperation, I sought out Eleanor's surviving relatives, hoping to uncover more about her fate. I found her niece, Margaret, a middle-aged woman with a wary expression. She was hesitant to speak at first, but when I explained my situation, her demeanor shifted from reluctance to concern. "Eleanor was always talking about the shadows," Margaret said. She claimed they whispered to her, showed her terrible visions. She tried to exorcise them, but nothing worked. Margaret handed me a worn leather journal, Eleanor's diary. As I read through it, I found detailed accounts of her descent into madness. She described the same figure that now haunted me, a dark entity that fed on fear and despair. "It wants to consume me," she wrote, "to take my soul." The more I read, the clearer it became that Eleanor had fought a losing battle against this malevolent force. Armed with this knowledge, I returned home, determined to confront the spirit. I enlisted Tom's help once more, and we performed a seance, hoping to communicate with the entity. The room was filled with the scent of burning sage, and candles flickered ominously. As we joined hands, Tom began to chant, calling out to the spirit. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, the air grew heavy, and a cold wind swept through the room, extinguishing the candles. The figure materialized in the darkness, more solid and terrifying than ever. "Why are you here?" Tom demanded, his voice steady despite the palpable fear. The spirit's hollow eyes fixed on me, and I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. It spoke, its voice a raspy whisper that chilled me to the bone. "She belongs to me." Tom tried to banish the spirit, reciting incantations and prayers, but it only grew angrier. Objects flew across the room, smashing against the walls. The oppressive weight of its presence pressed down on us, making it hard to breathe. In the chaos, I grabbed Eleanor's diary, holding it up like a shield. "Why me?" I shouted. "What do you want?" The spirit's form wavered, and for a moment, it seemed almost human. "You called me," it said. "With your fear, your despair. You invited me in." The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. My own fear had given it power, allowed it to latch onto me. The only way to break free was to confront my deepest fears, to refuse to let it control me. Tom and I regrouped in the aftermath of the seance, shaken but not defeated. He suggested a cleansing ritual, one that required facing the spirit head-on. "We need to sever the connection it has to you," he said. "But it's going to be dangerous. You need to be prepared for whatever it throws at us." I nodded, determination hardening my resolve. This had to end, one way or another. We gathered the necessary materials, candles, salt, holy water, and a silver mirror. The mirror, Tom explained, was crucial for trapping the spirit. We'll need to confront it directly, force it into the mirror. Once it's contained, we can banish it for good. The plan sounded tenuous at best, but it was the only option we had. I braced myself for the confrontation, my nerves taut with anticipation. The ritual took place at midnight, the house shrouded in darkness. Tom drew a circle of salt around us, the candles casting long shadows on the walls. He began to chant, invoking protective spirits and ancient gods. The air grew thick with tension, the oppressive presence of the entity looming closer. As the chanting reached a crescendo, the figure appeared, more menacing than ever. Its eyes were pits of darkness, its form twisted and unnatural. "You cannot banish me," it hissed, its voice echoing with malevolence. I felt an icy grip on my heart, but I stood my ground. "You have no power over me," I declared, my voice wavering only slightly. The spirit laughed, a sound that sent chills down my spine. "You think you are strong? You are nothing but prey." The room seemed to warp around us, the walls closing in. Objects floated in the air, spinning wildly. Tom held the mirror aloft, its surface gleaming in the candlelight. "Look into the mirror," he commanded, his voice firm. The spirit recoiled, but I stepped forward, drawing its attention. "Face me," I demanded. The entity's gaze locked onto mine, its fury palpable. The mirror's surface rippled as the spirit's reflection appeared, distorted and grotesque. It howled in rage, its form beginning to waver. "No," it screamed. "You cannot imprison me." Tom continued to chant, his voice rising above the spirit's cries. The room shook, and I felt a surge of power, an almost tangible force pushing against the spirit. "I am not afraid of you," I said, my voice steady now. "You have no hold over me." With a final, ear-piercing shriek, the spirit was pulled into the mirror, its form distorting and collapsing inward. The surface of the mirror shimmered, then solidified, trapping the entity within. The oppressive weight lifted, the air clearing. Tom lowered the mirror, his face pale but triumphant. "It's done," he said, his voice hoarse. "We've trapped it." Exhausted, I sank to the floor, the adrenaline draining from my body. Tom placed the mirror carefully in a protective case, sealing it with wards and symbols. "We need to take this to a safe place," he said. "Somewhere it can never escape." I nodded, too drained to respond. The ordeal had left me shaken, but there was a glimmer of hope. Maybe now, I could finally find peace. But that night, as I lay in bed, a new fear took root. What if the spirit wasn't truly gone? What if it could find a way back? My phone buzzed, a notification lighting up the screen. I picked it up, my heart pounding. "New face detected," the message read. My blood ran cold. I turned slowly, dreading what I might see. The notification on my phone sent a shockwave of terror through me. The screen glowed in the darkness, a beacon of dread. "New face detected." I took a deep breath and turned, bracing for the worst. But the room was empty. My pulse hammered in my ears as I reached for the phone, hoping it was just another glitch. But deep down, I knew the truth. The spirit wasn't gone. I called Tom immediately. "It's back," I said, my voice trembling. "The spirit is back." He listened quietly, then sighed. "I was afraid of this," he admitted. "Sometimes, entities this powerful leave a fragment of themselves behind. We need to finish this, once and for all." He arrived within the hour, his face grim. We prepared for another confrontation, gathering the mirror and the tools we had used before. This time, we decided to take the fight to the source. We went to the basement, the oldest and most secluded part of the house. The air was damp and cold, the walls lined with ancient brick. Tom set up the candles and drew a new circle of salt. "This is where we make our stand," he said. "Whatever happens, stay within the circle. It can't touch us here." As Tom began the ritual, the air grew heavy with anticipation. The candles flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. The basement felt alive with energy, a palpable sense of foreboding. The figure appeared almost immediately, its form more solid and terrifying than before. "You cannot escape me," it snarled, its voice a rasping hiss. "I will consume you." Tom held the mirror up, its surface reflecting the entity's twisted visage. "This ends now," he declared, his voice steady. "You have no power here." The spirit's eyes flared with anger, and it lunged at us, but the circle of salt held it back. It writhed and twisted, its form distorting in the candlelight. "You cannot contain me forever," it hissed. "I will find a way." The room shook violently, objects flying off the shelves and crashing to the ground. Tom chanted louder, his voice a beacon of defiance. The spirit's form began to waver, its edges blurring. "Focus on your strength," Tom urged. "Remember, it feeds on fear. Don't give it power." I closed my eyes, forcing myself to remember the good things in my life, the reasons to fight back. As the spirit's form began to collapse, a new voice joined the fray. "Eleanor," I whispered. Her presence was suddenly palpable, a calming force against the darkness. "You are not alone," she seemed to say. "We can fight this together." The spirit howled in rage, its form flickering wildly. The mirror's surface shimmered, drawing the entity in, piece by piece. With a final, desperate scream, the spirit was sucked into the mirror, its form disappearing into the shimmering depths. The basement fell silent, the oppressive weight lifting. Tom sealed the mirror once more, his face etched with relief. "It's over," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "For real this time." We buried the mirror deep in the woods, far from any living soul. As we covered it with earth, I felt a sense of finality, a release from the terror that had gripped my life. "Thank you," I said to Tom, my voice thick with emotion. He nodded, his eyes tired but hopeful. "You were stronger than you knew," he replied. "And you aren't alone." Back home, the house felt different, lighter. The shadows were just shadows, the whispers just the wind. I slept soundly for the first time in weeks, the nightmares finally at bay. But in the back of my mind, a question lingered: had we truly vanquished the spirit, or merely delayed the inevitable? That question was answered a few days later, when my phone buzzed with a new notification. "New face detected." I froze, dread washing over me. I turned slowly, praying it was a mistake. But this time, I wasn't met with an empty room. There, in the reflection of the mirror, stood Eleanor. Her face was serene, almost sad. "It's not over," she whispered. "Hey. Subscribe for more true scary stories." Story 2. The Echoing Whispers. It all started innocently enough, a slight itch in my ear that I chalked up to water from my morning shower. I remember shaking my head, tapping the side of my ear, and even using a cotton swab in a futile attempt to alleviate the discomfort. But the itch persisted, growing more irritating with each passing hour. By the time evening rolled around, the itch had become a maddening tickle, as if something tiny and insistent was crawling inside my ear canal. "I must be imagining things," I muttered to myself, staring at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. The reflection stared back, pale and tired, with dark circles under its eyes. I'd been working long hours at the library, cataloging ancient texts and obscure manuscripts, and it seemed to be taking its toll. I tried to distract myself with my work, but the sensation only grew worse. It felt like 1,000 tiny legs scrambling deeper into my ear. By midnight, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed a flashlight and aimed it at my ear, hoping to catch a glimpse of whatever was causing the irritation. But there was nothing there, just the smooth, pink walls of my ear canal. The frustration boiled over, and I decided to call my friend Ethan, who was a doctor. "Ethan, I need your help," I said as soon as he answered, my voice tinged with desperation. Ethan arrived within the hour, his medical bag in tow. He was a calm and collected man, someone who rarely got rattled. "Let's take a look," he said, guiding me to sit under the bright kitchen light. He peered into my ear with his otoscope, his expression remaining neutral. But then, his brow furrowed, and he pulled back, looking puzzled. "There's nothing in there, but your ear canal is red and inflamed. It might be an infection. I'll prescribe some drops to help." I nodded, feeling a mix of relief and frustration. At least it wasn't some bug crawling in my ear, but the itch remained. Over the next few days, I used the drops religiously, but the sensation didn't abate. If anything, it grew more intense, accompanied by a faint, echoing whisper that seemed to emanate from deep within my ear. It was like hearing a distant conversation, just out of reach. The whispers grew louder at night, making sleep impossible. They spoke in a language I couldn't understand, a guttural and ancient tongue that sent shivers down my spine. I began to dread the nighttime, knowing that I would be tormented by those ghostly voices. My once peaceful apartment felt oppressive, the walls closing in as the whispers grew more insistent. I found myself avoiding mirrors, fearing what I might see in my reflection. It wasn't long before the whispers began to take shape, forming coherent words that chilled me to the bone. "We are coming," they said. "We are many. We are hungry." Panic seized me, and I decided to return to the library, hoping to find some clue in the old texts that might explain what was happening to me. The library, with its towering shelves and dusty tomes, had always been a place of solace. But now, it felt like a labyrinth of shadows, each corner hiding something sinister. As I pored over ancient manuscripts and forgotten books, the whispers grew louder, more urgent. My hands shook as I turned the fragile pages, searching for anything that might help. And then, in the dim light of the reading room, I found it, a reference to an ancient curse, a malevolent entity that could invade a person's mind through their ears, driving them to madness. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. This was no ordinary itch. I was being haunted by something far more terrifying than I could have ever imagined. The old manuscript was brittle and yellowed, its pages threatening to crumble under my trembling fingers. The text, written in an archaic script, spoke of a malevolent entity known as the Whisperer, a being that infiltrated the minds of its victims through their ears. It fed on fear and despair, growing stronger as its host weakened. According to the text, once the Whisperer had latched on, it was nearly impossible to remove. I sat back, my heart pounding. The description matched my symptoms perfectly. The itching, the whispers, the sense of something crawling inside me, it all pointed to the Whisperer. But how had it found me? And why? My mind raced with questions, each one more terrifying than the last. I needed answers, and I needed them fast. Ethan was my first call. "You need to come to the library," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I found something, and it's bad." Ethan arrived quickly, his expression a mix of concern and skepticism. I showed him the manuscript, pointing to the passages that described the Whisperer. "This is what's happening to me," I said, my voice shaking. "It's not an infection. It's this." Ethan frowned, scanning the text. "This sounds like something out of a horror movie, not a medical diagnosis," he said. But he saw the desperation in my eyes and relented. "Okay, let's assume this is real. What does it say about getting rid of it?" I flipped through the pages, searching for any mention of a cure. The manuscript detailed the horrors inflicted by the Whisperer but offered little hope for those afflicted. It spoke of ancient rituals and powerful talismans, artifacts long lost to time. My heart sank as I realized the chances of finding such items were slim to none. "We need help," Ethan said finally. "Someone who knows about this kind of stuff. An expert in the occult or something." My thoughts immediately turned to Professor Hawthorne, an eccentric but brilliant scholar who specialized in ancient cultures and supernatural lore. He had a reputation for being reclusive, but if anyone could help, it would be him. I decided to pay him a visit, hoping he would have some insight into my situation. Professor Hawthorne's house was exactly as I'd imagined, a sprawling, old mansion filled with books, artifacts, and the smell of incense. He greeted us at the door, his eyes twinkling with curiosity. "What brings you to my humble abode?" he asked, ushering us inside. I explained my predicament, showing him the manuscript and detailing my symptoms. He listened intently, nodding occasionally. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "The Whisperer is a formidable entity," he said finally. "But it's not invincible. There are ways to fight it, though they are perilous and not always successful." My heart leapt. "What do I need to do?" Hawthorne stood, moving to a dusty bookshelf. He pulled out a thick, leather-bound tome and began flipping through its pages. "There is a ritual," he said slowly, "one that can sever the Whisperer's connection to you. But it requires rare ingredients and must be performed precisely. One mistake, and the consequences could be dire." He listed the ingredients: a sprig of nightshade, a vial of pure spring water, and a piece of obsidian blessed under a full moon. Each item came with its own set of challenges, but I was determined. "I'll do whatever it takes," I said, my voice resolute. Hawthorne nodded. "Very well. But be warned, the Whisperer will not go quietly. It will fight you every step of the way. You must be strong, and you must not give in to the fear." As I left the professor's house, the whispers in my ear grew louder, more insistent. They knew what I was planning, and they didn't like it. My resolve wavered for a moment, but I steeled myself. I had no choice but to see this through. The alternative was unthinkable. The journey to gather the necessary items was fraught with obstacles. The first ingredient, a sprig of nightshade, was said to grow only in the darkest corners of the forest. Ethan and I set out early one morning, navigating through dense underbrush and tangled roots. The deeper we went, the more oppressive the forest became, as if it were aware of our presence and displeased by it. The whispers in my ear grew louder, more frantic. "Turn back," they urged. "You're making a mistake." I shook my head, trying to ignore the voices. Ethan glanced at me with concern, but said nothing. He knew better than to ask questions that had no comforting answers. We finally found the nightshade, its dark berries glistening ominously in the faint light. I plucked a sprig, careful not to crush the delicate leaves. As we made our way back to the car, the forest seemed to close in around us, the whispers growing more agitated. I quickened my pace, desperate to escape the suffocating gloom. The next item on our list was a vial of pure spring water. This seemed straightforward enough, but finding a spring untouched by modern pollution proved challenging. After days of searching, we finally located a secluded spot in the mountains, a crystal-clear spring hidden away from prying eyes. As I filled the vial, the whispers shifted in tone, a mix of anger and desperation. "You will fail," they hissed. "We will consume you." I clenched my jaw, refusing to let the fear take hold. Each step closer to completing the ritual felt like a victory, but the cost was taking its toll. Sleep eluded me, the voices in my ear relentless and unforgiving. The final item, a piece of obsidian blessed under a full moon, required precise timing. The next full moon was only days away, and we had no choice but to wait. During those long, sleepless nights, the whispers became more insidious, weaving dark tales of doom and despair. I found myself questioning my sanity, wondering if perhaps I was already lost. When the night of the full moon finally arrived, Ethan and I drove to an ancient stone circle, a place of power and mystery. The moon hung high in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the landscape. Professor Hawthorne met us there, his presence a reassuring anchor in the midst of chaos. "We must hurry," he said, his voice grave. "The moon's blessing is fleeting." He handed me the obsidian, its smooth surface cold and heavy in my hand. We gathered around the central stone, Hawthorne guiding us through the ritual steps. The air was thick with tension, each word of the incantation vibrating with energy. As we chanted, the whispers in my ear became a cacophony of screams, a chorus of rage and fear. It felt as though my head would explode, the pressure unbearable. I gripped the obsidian tighter, focusing all my will on the task at hand. Hawthorne's voice cut through the noise, steady and unwavering. Suddenly, the obsidian began to glow, a faint light emanating from its depths. The whispers turned into a deafening roar, and I felt a searing pain in my ear, as if something was being ripped away. I screamed, the sound echoing through the night, mingling with the cries of the whisperer. And then, just as abruptly, there was silence. I collapsed to the ground, panting and drenched in sweat. The whispers were gone, replaced by an overwhelming sense of emptiness. Ethan helped me to my feet, his face etched with concern. "Is it over?" he asked, his voice barely audible. Hawthorne nodded, but his expression was wary. "For now. But the whisperer is a tenacious entity. It may seek to return." He handed me the glowing obsidian. "Keep this with you at all times. It will serve as a ward against the whisperer's influence." As we left the stone circle, I couldn't shake the feeling that the victory was temporary. The night was still and quiet, but I knew the whisperer was out there, waiting for another chance to invade my mind. The battle was won, but the war was far from over. The real horror was just beginning. The days that followed were unnervingly quiet. Without the constant whispers in my ear, the world seemed strangely silent. But the respite did little to calm my nerves. I carried the obsidian with me everywhere, its cool surface a reminder of the fragility of my victory. I couldn't shake the feeling that the whisperer was lurking, waiting for a moment of weakness. One evening, as I was sorting through the manuscripts at the library, I noticed something peculiar. An old, leather-bound book had appeared on my desk, one I was certain I hadn't retrieved. It was covered in strange symbols and gave off an air of foreboding. I hesitated before opening it, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. The book detailed rituals and curses similar to those in Professor Hawthorne's tome, but with one significant difference: it mentioned a way to banish the Whisperer permanently. The ritual required a final confrontation, a direct challenge to the entity in the place where it was strongest, within the victim's own mind. My hands trembled as I read the instructions. It was dangerous, but if successful, it would end the torment once and for all. I called Ethan and Hawthorne, explaining what I had found. Ethan was skeptical but agreed to help. Hawthorne, on the other hand, seemed both intrigued and wary. "This is risky," he warned. "The Whisperer is at its most powerful in your mind. If you falter, it could consume you entirely." Despite the danger, I was resolute. "I can't live like this," I said. "I have to try." We prepared for the ritual that night. Hawthorne set up a circle of protection in my living room, using ancient symbols and burning incense to create a barrier against the Whisperer's influence. I sat in the center, clutching the obsidian, while Ethan and Hawthorne stood outside the circle, ready to intervene if necessary. As Hawthorne began chanting, I closed my eyes and focused on the obsidian, letting its cool energy flow through me. The whispers returned, faint at first but growing louder and more aggressive. "You cannot defeat us," they hissed. "We are eternal." I felt a sudden pull, as if being drawn into a dark abyss. The world around me faded, replaced by a twisted landscape of shadows and echoes. The Whisperer's domain. I stood on a barren plain, the air thick with malice. Shapes moved in the darkness, indistinct but menacing. I gripped the obsidian tighter, trying to summon my courage. A figure emerged from the shadows, a grotesque amalgamation of faces and forms. It spoke in a voice that reverberated through my mind. "You dare challenge us," it snarled. "You are nothing." Summoning every ounce of resolve, I stepped forward. "I'm not afraid of you," I lied. "You have no power over me." The Whisperer laughed, a sound like shattering glass. It lunged at me, a whirlwind of darkness. I raised the obsidian, its light piercing the shadows. The entity recoiled, shrieking in pain. I pressed forward, chanting the incantation Hawthorne had taught me. The light from the obsidian grew brighter, forcing the shadows to retreat. "You cannot banish us," the Whisperer cried, its form flickering. "We are legion." But I could feel its power waning. The obsidian was working, channeling my will into a weapon against the darkness. I focused on the light, pouring all my fear and determination into the chant. The Whisperer's form disintegrated, the shadows dissipating into nothingness. I felt a surge of triumph, the oppressive weight lifting from my mind. I opened my eyes to find myself back in my living room, the protective circle glowing faintly. Ethan and Hawthorne were watching, their expressions a mix of relief and amazement. "Is it over?" Ethan asked, his voice tentative. I nodded, feeling an overwhelming sense of peace. "It's over," I said, my voice steady. "The Whisperer is gone." Hawthorne smiled, but his eyes held a note of caution. "You've done well, but remain vigilant. There are always other dangers lurking in the shadows." As I stood up, the obsidian still warm in my hand, I knew he was right. The battle was won, but the war against the darkness was never truly over. I would always carry the scars of this encounter, a reminder of the thin veil between our world and the horrors that lie beyond. But for now, I was free, and that was enough. The end. Subscribe for more true scary stories. Thanks for watching.